It began in the hopeful haze of the late 1950s, a world shaking off the trauma of war and stepping eagerly into the promise of science. Factories roared again, cities glowed brighter each night, and in the homes of the tired and the restless, there was one shared struggle that science seemed ready to solve: sleep. Doctors everywhere were prescribing barbiturates, heavy, addictive sedatives that often left patients groggy, dependent, or worse, dead. People wanted something gentler, something safe. And soon, their prayers appeared to be answered. In a small West German laboratory, a team of chemists had synthesized a compound so mild they claimed even a child could take it. It promised to calm nerves, ease nausea, and lull even the most anxious mind into peaceful rest, without the dangers of older sleeping pills. The company behind it, Chemie Grünenthal, named their miracle thalidomide. By 1957, advertisements spread across Europe, elegant women smiling beside their bedside lamps, holding tiny pastel-colored pills between manicured fingers. The slogan whispered comfort: safe, gentle, harmless. Doctors began prescribing it freely, not just for insomnia, but for morning sickness, for stress, for the aches of modern life. And why not? Early tests showed no signs of toxicity. In laboratory animals, even massive doses failed to kill. To many physicians, this seemed like proof: thalidomide was a wonder drug. Pharmacies across Germany, the UK, Canada, and Australia stocked shelves high. Samples were sent to doctors' offices, offered freely. In some countries, you could even buy it without a prescription. Each night, thousands of expectant mothers took it to quiet the queasiness of early pregnancy, trusting it would help them, and their unborn children, sleep better. But beneath the surface of this medical triumph, quiet signs began to stir, faint whispers drowned out by optimism. A few doctors noticed strange side effects: tingling in the hands and feet, dizziness, slurred speech. One German physician reported patients complaining they could no longer feel the ground beneath them. But the company dismissed it, calling the symptoms mild and temporary. Then came a letter, one that should have changed everything. It was written by a physician in Hamburg who had noticed something deeply troubling: an unusual number of babies were being born with limb deformities. Arms like flippers. Hands growing where shoulders should be. Legs fused or missing. He wondered, could it be linked to thalidomide? His letter was polite but urgent. It reached Chemie Grünenthal's offices, but was quietly filed away. No causal connection proven, their response would later read. By 1959, whispers turned to murmurs. Across continents, hospitals began seeing the same thing: infants born with limbs so malformed they resembled sea creatures more than humans. Some had no ears. Some had no eyes. Internal organs were missing, or misplaced. Doctors were baffled. Genetic mutations couldn't explain a sudden spike of identical malformations in so many places at once. And yet, no alarm was sounded. There were no international drug safety systems, no global warnings, no cross-border investigations. Each country's doctors thought it was a local tragedy. Each mother thought it was her fault. Meanwhile, sales of thalidomide soared. It became one of the best-selling sedatives in Europe. In Britain alone, the drug was prescribed under dozens of brand names: Contergan, Distaval, Kevadan, Softinon, each promising calm and safety. In the United States, too, the drug's maker prepared for launch. A massive marketing push was ready, millions of samples printed, pamphlets designed. But one woman at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, a young pharmacologist named Dr. Frances Kelsey, refused to sign the approval papers. She had read the animal tests. Something about them bothered her: there were no studies on pregnant animals, no data on long-term effects. When company representatives pressed her, she asked one simple question: how do you know it's safe for unborn children? They had no answer. So she stalled. 4 months. Under pressure, under threat, she kept demanding evidence, and never got it. Her refusal would later save thousands of American children. But at that moment, across the Atlantic, it was already too late. One person's courage can stand against a tide of negligence. Subscribe for more stories of the individuals who dared to question, and in doing so, saved countless lives. By 1960, midwives and obstetricians began whispering among themselves, "Have you seen them too?" Entire wards of newborns, tiny and fragile, struggling to breathe. Some without arms, others with no legs at all. Their cries echoed through maternity hospitals, weak, broken cries that would haunt nurses for the rest of their lives. Mothers awoke from delivery asking for their babies, and doctors hesitated. What could they say? Many infants didn't survive more than a few days. The ones who did became the faces of a mystery, one the world was not yet ready to face. Still, Chemi Granenthal denied everything. They blamed viral infections, genetic coincidence, even poor nutrition. In their offices, executives toasted record profits. Advertisements kept running. Doctors kept prescribing. And mothers, exhausted, trusting, kept taking their nightly dose of harmless sleep. But the truth was spreading, one baby at a time. In 1961, a pediatrician named Dr. Wittekind Lenz in Germany made a chilling discovery. He noticed a pattern: nearly every mother who had given birth to a child with phocomelia, the stunted limb condition, had taken thalidomide during pregnancy. He began collecting cases, hundreds of them. Then he did what no one else had dared: he spoke publicly. He demanded the company withdraw the drug immediately. At first, they dismissed him. Then, quietly, they began recalling tablets. But by the time thalidomide was pulled from shelves, it had already been sold in 46 countries. Estimates suggest more than 10,000 babies were born with deformities, and countless more pregnancies ended before birth. For years, these families would face silence, shame, and denial. But soon, the world would wake. Because when science betrays trust, the reckoning always comes, and it always comes in blood. By the winter of 1961, Europe had begun to sense that something was terribly wrong. Pediatric wards that once echoed with the laughter of new life were now filled with silence, punctuated only by the faint, labored breaths of babies born into pain. In one London hospital, a young nurse recalled the night she first saw a thalidomide baby. The mother had endured a difficult pregnancy, taking her doctor's advice to soothe her sickness with those safe little pills. When the infant arrived, the room went still. The baby's arms were short, curved like fins, its hands, tiny and twisted, reached for a world it could never properly touch. The nurse froze, her instinct to comfort clashing with shock. No one spoke for several minutes. Finally, the doctor whispered, "Wrap the child, carefully." These moments repeated in hospital after hospital, each birth leaving doctors confused, parents shattered, and officials evasive. Many parents never even saw their children. In some places, doctors quietly took malformed infants away, calling them stillborn or too weak. It was easier, they thought, than telling the truth. But word began to spread. Mothers compared stories in hushed tones. They realized they had all taken the same pill. Some had even seen the cheerful ads, smiling women promising serenity, only now, those same posters looked like mockery. In Germany, Dr. Wittekind Lenz's findings reached the press. He was careful, scientific, but unflinching: the drug thalidomide causes birth defects. Within days, the news hit headlines across Europe. Panic spread. Pharmacies scrambled to pull stock from shelves. But it was far too late. In the United Kingdom, more than 2,000 babies had already been born with severe deformities. In Australia and Canada, hundreds more. In Germany, the heart of the disaster, entire towns had clusters of victims. Many babies didn't survive infancy. Those who did would face a lifetime of surgeries, stares, and questions with no easy answers. For the mothers, the guilt was unbearable. They had followed doctors' orders, trusted science, trusted safety. Yet when their babies were born broken, society turned its eyes away. Some were told it was their fault, that they had smoked, or drank, or sinned. Others were told nothing at all. One mother, interviewed years later, recalled clutching her child, a daughter with no arms, as nurses whispered nearby. They said she would never walk, never feed herself, never live, she said. But she did. She lived to remind the world what blind faith in medicine can cost. And in that reminder lay the heart of the tragedy. This was not a story of monsters, but of mistakes, compounded by arrogance and silence. Doctors had trusted the drug because it seemed harmless. Companies had sold it because it made money. Regulators had allowed it because testing standards were primitive. No one wanted to believe that a pill meant to comfort could also destroy. Meanwhile, behind corporate doors, panic brewed. Chemi Grunenthal's lawyers prepared statements denying all wrongdoing. There is no proof, they insisted. Correlation is not causation. They claimed the defects were a coincidence, an unfortunate twist of genetics or fate. But the evidence was mounting faster than they could deny it. Case after case showed the same pattern: mothers who took thalidomide during the first trimester, when limbs and organs form, gave birth to children with missing or malformed limbs. The timing was precise, the damage exact. It was as if the drug had reached into the womb and rewritten life itself. Across the Atlantic, Dr. Francis Kelsey's caution at the FDA became a symbol of resistance. When the news from Europe reached Washington, U.S. health officials realized how close they had come to disaster. The American public learned that, but for one woman's persistence, thousands more children could have been born disabled. Kelsey's refusal was hailed as heroic. In 1962, President Kennedy awarded her the Gold Medal for Distinguished Federal Service, a rare honor. But in Europe, Asia, Africa, and Australia, there was no comfort, only reckoning. Parents began to organize, demanding answers, demanding accountability. Journalists uncovered that Chemi Grunenthal had known about nerve damage side effects years earlier. Reports from factory doctors described workers developing numbness and pain, signs of the drug's toxicity, long before it reached pharmacies. The company had ignored them. Still, lawsuits were slow. Courts hesitated to rule against a powerful pharmaceutical firm. Evidence vanished. Records were altered. Executives insisted they had done nothing wrong. The scale of suffering was too vast for easy justice. And for the victims, the children growing up without arms or legs, justice felt abstract. They faced a world not built for them. Wheelchairs were rare. Schools turned them away. Many were hidden at home, shielded from cruel stares. Yet among the survivors, a quiet strength began to grow. Some learned to write, paint, or eat with their feet. Others became advocates, refusing to be pitted or forgotten. They would later become the faces of change, reminders that safety regulations are not bureaucratic red tape, but the fragile line between trust and tragedy. Governments around the world began asking, how did this happen? How had a sedative, sold without proper testing, reached millions? The answer would shake the foundations of medicine. Because thalidomide was not just a medical failure, it was a moral one. It revealed a truth too long ignored, that science without scrutiny, and profit without conscience, can turn healing into harm. And so began the investigations, the long, painful search for responsibility. The world was about to look into the mirror and confront what it had done. By early 1962, the full weight of the thalidomide disaster was undeniable. Hospitals, investigators, and grieving parents had all converged on a single, horrifying truth: the so-called safe sedative had maimed an entire generation. Now came the question that haunted everyone: who was to blame? In Bonn, Germany, the headquarters of Chemie Grünenthal became a fortress. Angry families gathered outside with photographs of their children, tiny faces framed by wheelchairs and prosthetics, chanting for answers. Inside, executives huddled in silence. Their lawyers urged restraint: admit nothing, deny everything. But silence was no longer possible. Newspapers across Europe ran front-page exposés. Reporters dug into factory records and uncovered internal memos mentioning unexplained neuropathic effects and sensory disturbances, written years before the drug reached pharmacies. Some memos even warned that workers handling the compound were developing numbness in their fingers, yet no further tests were ordered. The story was spreading like wildfire: a corporate cover-up, a negligent regulatory system, and a public deceived by glossy ads and soothing slogans. In Germany, prosecutors prepared charges of negligent homicide and bodily injury. The case would become one of the longest, most painful trials in post-war Europe, not just a legal battle, but a moral reckoning for modern medicine. But the courtroom was not the only arena. Around the world, scientists and regulators began dissecting how this could have happened. What they found was chilling. There had been no requirement to test drugs on pregnant animals. No obligation to disclose side effects from foreign markets. No system for recalling medicines proven dangerous. Pharmaceutical approval relied largely on trust, and trust, as the world now saw, could be fatal. The press called thalidomide the sleep of reason. In Britain, a parliamentary inquiry summoned doctors, distributors, and ministers. Each tried to shift blame. We were misled by the manufacturer. The tests appeared sound. No one could have predicted such deformities. Yet beneath the polite testimonies lay a shared guilt, the guilt of a system that valued convenience over caution. In Australia, pediatrician Dr. William McBride, who had independently linked thalidomide to birth defects, testified before government panels. His findings matched those of Dr. Lenz in Germany. Together, their work became irrefutable evidence. Still, corporate lawyers argued endlessly over definitions. Was causation proven? Were the studies controlled? The courtroom filled with medical jargon, while outside, parents held their crippled children, living proof no expert could deny. The trial dragged on for nearly a decade. Victims and witnesses came and went. Judges changed. Evidence vanished. Some families, too poor to wait, accepted meager settlements, often less than a few $1,000s for a lifetime of disability. Meanwhile, public outrage grew. Editorials demanded global reform. Never again, they wrote. Never again must safety be assumed. But justice was uneven. Chemie Grünenthal executives eventually faced criminal charges, yet in 1970, most walked free after a settlement. The company issued a carefully worded apology: "We regret the consequences of thalidomide." No admission of guilt. No acceptance of responsibility. For survivors, it felt like betrayal all over again. Still, something had shifted. Across Europe, governments began rewriting their drug laws. They introduced stricter approval processes, mandatory animal testing, and systems to track adverse reactions. The tragedy had forced science to evolve. And at the center of this shift stood those who refused to stay silent: the parents, the doctors, and especially the survivors. In Britain, a group of thalidomide children became advocates for reform. They testified before Parliament, not as victims, but as warnings. "We are what happens," one said, "when medicine forgets to ask questions." Their courage inspired others. In Canada, a journalist's investigation exposed how thalidomide had continued to be distributed months after the recall, due to bureaucratic delays. In Japan, regulators quietly withdrew dozens of similar drugs pending review. In the United States, Congress passed sweeping legislation, the Kefauver-Harris Amendments, requiring proof of both safety and efficacy before any new drug could be marketed. It was the most significant reform in modern pharmaceutical history. For Dr. Frances Kelsey, who had once stood alone against industry pressure, it was vindication. She was celebrated worldwide, though she deflected praise. "I was just doing my job," she said. But history would remember her as the woman who stopped a tragedy at America's door. Yet for every reformer, there were still thousands of children growing up in a world not built for them. They faced surgeries, prosthetics, and endless physical therapy. Some learned to paint with their feet, drive with modified cars, or play instruments with their mouths. Their resilience became their rebellion, proof that life could endure even in the shadow of betrayal. Still, the psychological scars ran deep. Many mothers could never forgive themselves, even though the fault was never theirs. Some destroyed the pill bottles that had betrayed them, others kept them hidden in drawers, tiny relics of trust gone wrong. In 1968, a German newspaper asked one mother what justice would look like. She answered softly, "Justice would be to go back in time, before I took the pill." But time only moved forward, and with it, the push for accountability grew. Medical schools began teaching ethics as rigorously as chemistry. Clinical trials became transparent. Regulators learned that vigilance was not bureaucracy, it was the backbone of public trust. The reckoning was far from complete, but it had begun. And from the courtroom to the classroom, a new question echoed: if one drug could do this, what else might be hiding behind the label, safe? The world would not find peace until it could answer, and legislate, that question. The world that emerged from the ashes of thalidomide was not the same one that had embraced it. The smiling faces from the drug's old advertisements were gone now, replaced by photographs that history could never unsee: children born without arms, without legs, sitting upright with quiet dignity, staring directly into the camera. They were the silent witnesses of an age's blind faith. Their existence forced humanity to confront a truth it had long ignored: that medicine, left unregulated, could harm as easily as it could heal. And that trust, once broken, must be rebuilt through law. In 1962, the United States passed the Kefauver-Harris Drug Amendments, a direct result of the thalidomide disaster. For the first time, pharmaceutical companies were required to prove both safety and effectiveness before a drug could reach the public. Every clinical test had to be transparent, every side effect reported, every human trial monitored. The age of casual approval was over. In Europe, similar reforms spread like aftershocks. West Germany, once home to Chemie Grünenthal, established a new federal health office, introducing mandatory preclinical testing on pregnant animals, pharmacovigilance systems to track side effects, and the right to recall any drug at the first sign of danger. The UK created the Committee on Safety of Drugs, a permanent watchdog that would evolve into today's Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, MHRA. These laws were more than paperwork. They were promises, carved from grief, sealed with the suffering of thousands. But for survivors, no legislation could return what had been lost. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, thalidomide children grew into adults, demanding visibility and compensation. Many had endured hundreds of surgeries. Prosthetics clamped where limbs should have grown. They were expected to adapt, to live quietly. But they refused silence. In Britain, they formed advocacy groups, confronting both government and the drug's distributor, distillers. Their campaign was relentless, carried on television screens and front-page headlines: "We were poisoned before we were born." Public outrage reignited. By 1973, distillers agreed to a settlement, but it was small, and only after years of legal struggle. In Germany, victims faced an even slower path. The 1970 settlement from Chemie Grünenthal was modest, a one-time payment, followed by the creation of the Kontergan Foundation for Disabled People, named after thalidomide's German brand. Yet for many families, it felt hollow. No executive had gone to prison. No one had said, plainly, we did this. Still, from their suffering came structure. The Contergan Foundation became one of the world's first long-term compensation systems for pharmaceutical victims. Other nations followed suit, recognizing that justice in medicine must outlive the news cycle. Meanwhile, science began to evolve, too. The thalidomide tragedy taught researchers to view the human body, especially the unborn child, with new reverence. Embryology, toxicology, and pharmacovigilance grew into robust fields. The phrase, teratogenic risk, once obscure, became central to every pregnancy warning label. And yet, the story did not end in condemnation. In a strange twist of history, thalidomide would one day find redemption, not for sleep, but for suffering. In the 1990s, researchers discovered it could suppress the painful inflammation of leprosy and certain cancers like multiple myeloma. But this time, it came wrapped in warnings, strict pregnancy controls, and global oversight. Every patient was registered, every dose monitored. The ghost of its past never left its label. That irony, that a drug once known for destruction could later bring relief, underscored the story's final lesson: science is neither good nor evil. It is the hands that wield it, and the systems that check them, that decide the outcome. In 2012, 50 years after the first recall, Chemie Grunenthal's CEO finally stepped before survivors and offered a public apology. He unveiled a bronze statue, a child with missing limbs, seated in contemplation. "We ask for forgiveness," he said, "for not reaching out to you sooner." Many survivors turned away. Forgiveness was not theirs to give, they said, not for what had been done, not for the silence that followed. But their courage had already rewritten history. Today, every new drug undergoes years of clinical trials. Every side effect is logged, analyzed, and reported globally. Regulators share data across borders, and pregnant women are shielded by layers of safety checks unimaginable in 1957. The system isn't perfect, but it was born from their pain. From their small hands that never grew, the world learned to reach farther. From their broken bodies, medicine learned humility. And from their silent cries, the law found its voice. The thalidomide tragedy became a warning etched in every pharmacy, every research lab, every regulatory office, that no innovation is worth a generation's suffering, and no cure is complete without conscience. The survivors, now elders, often say they do not want pity. What they want is memory. Because memory keeps laws alive. And so, long after the courtrooms emptied and the pills turned to dust, their story remains, a reminder that every signature on a safety form, every delayed approval, every demanding question, exists for a reason. A reason written not in ink, but in blood. If this story reminded you why vigilance matters, subscribe to our channel. We uncover the forgotten tragedies and triumphant stories that shaped our world.